Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Sunday, April 11th, and we're breaking down this 10-game day slate that we have over on DraftKings to end this weekend. Hopefully it's been a good one for you guys, but if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. If you want to follow me over on social media, the handle's in the bottom 10 corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. You get access to the projections, the optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, data sheets, Discord community, and all that fun stuff. Link is down below. And I think that's it for the shameless plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we will start with the pitchers. And pitching is not very good in the slate. I will say that to start this off, because it's never good when Marcus Stroman is looking like our ace of the slate. And I don't mean to disrespect him. I think he's a fine, solid pitcher, but he's definitely not like a Jacob deGrom or a Shane Bieber or anything like that. So paying $9,100 for him does feel pretty weird. If it was a different slate, he would definitely be cheaper, but here we are. But we have to play with what we get. So Marcus Stroman here versus Miami, I think, is a fine option. They haven't really been hitting too much so far this year, and not saying he is Jacob deGrom in the slightest, but deGrom absolutely carved this team up yesterday. I think he had like 14 or 15 strikeouts versus this Miami Marlins team. I want to say around 40-some DraftKings points. So once again, the Mets let him down, and they have a great lineup too. They got Lindor, Conforto, Alonso. There's a lot of good hitters in that lineup, and they just cannot score runs whenever deGrom is pitching. I'm not just talking this year. I'm talking ever since, man. They just cannot get him runs, which is why wins is I think a pretty dumb stat to base anything off of in baseball. Because when guys like deGrom could come out, mow down a lineup, and only give up I think he gave up a solo shot and not get any runs in support. That's been happening for years with deGrom. So just feel bad for the guy, and just a little, I guess, mini rant on why I think wins are really a bit of a useless stat there. But anyway, Marcus Stroman, he's a bit expensive. It doesn't feel great paying $9,100 for him. If it was a different slate and there's better pitchers on the mound, he would not be this expensive. But hey, we got to play with what DraftKings gives us here. It's a good spot versus Miami. Now, there's no game totals yet in this game. I think they're waiting on a confirmed pitcher in Miami, which I believe it's going to be Paul Campbell, but I don't think we've had complete confirmation on that, or I'm not sure why they're really waiting for the totals, but we'll see. But I can't imagine the Marlins have anything above 4 here. I'd imagine they're probably going to be sitting in the mid 3s or upper 3s here. He's got a 5.5 strikeout prop over in Vegas. We don't have any numbers to work with last year because he did opt out due to COVID, which you were eligible to do last year. But his numbers so far this season, it's only a 6-inning sample size, but he did have around 17 fantasy points. Didn't really have a bunch of strikeouts, but decent spot here versus Miami. It's an easier matchup than he had in his first start versus Phillies, and he was fine versus Phillies, so I think he could probably get you around 15 to 20 points in this matchup here versus the Marlins. If we want to take a look at the daily team sheet here, their projected lineup versus right-handed pitching, it's not all that great. We kind of went over this yesterday with Jacob deGrom, but in case you didn't happen to see it, they're at 23rd in batting average, 24th in WOBA, 22nd in ISO, 24th in WRC+, 22nd in slugging, 25th in on-base percentage, 24th in OPS, top half in the league in strikeouts, and just some overall pretty weak numbers. So kind of low to mid-20s in almost every single category versus right-handed pitching. And really, who scares you in this lineup besides Corey Dickerson and Starling Marte? I know Jesus Aguilar has got some power, but there's plenty of strikeouts to be had in this lineup. I know the top half of this lineup doesn't really strike out too much, like Dickerson, Marte, and Aguilar are all sitting below 20%. But besides those guys, Duvall's at 25, Anderson's at 30, Jazz Chisholm's at 31.3, even though he's the guy that homered yesterday versus Jacob deGrom. And then you have Jorge Alfaro at 38%. Miguel Rojas doesn't really strike out too much, but the guy doesn't really have much power in his bat, only a 112 ISO, WOBA less than 300 and a low batting average. So I think Marcus Stroman, while he probably is not going to strike out near 10 guys, if he can just get a handful of strikeouts, go 5 or 6 innings and pick up a win, that's not terrible. I know he's kind of expensive, but with the way this slate is, he does seem to check out as one of the better options up top for me. Then if you want an SP2 to pair with him, because I'm not really liking any of the other spend-up pitchers, so I think we could just kind of go down low and just kind of go good matchup hunting for the most part. So Matt Shoemaker at $6,900, he gets a good matchup here versus Seattle, and I've been playing pitchers versus Seattle, I feel like, a lot so far to start the season, and it hasn't really let me down too much. I know Pineda, they gave up a couple runs yesterday in the early slate, but I still think he had around 17-some fantasy points, so not terrible relative to what the pitching was on that slate. But Shoemaker, he's cheap. He had a pretty good start to start the season. He had 23 fantasy points versus Detroit, struck out 5 on 92 pitches with only 3 hits allowed. I realize Detroit's a pretty soft matchup for a right-handed pitcher, but so is Seattle. I've been using righties versus them so far. They have been striking out quite a bit. He's only got a 3.62 implied team total against him. decent sized favorite, a 5 strikeout prop over in Vegas. His numbers last year, only a 28 inning sample size, so I hate to put too much into it, but 4.14 xFIP, 23% K rate. The walks were a little bit high. He can give up some power. Fortunately, though, Seattle, I mean, they got a couple good hitters like Mitch Haniger, but outside of him, I'm not really overly concerned about this lineup. Last season versus righties, Mariners were at a 24% K rate, only a 146 ISO, WRC plus below 100, and a 310 WOBA. So not some of the most worst numbers in the world, but it's still a fine matchup for Matt Shoemaker. I like the price point as well. Then Ponce de Leon, $6,700. The Brewers had a pretty good game yesterday, but they're still a team that will struggle versus righties and strike out quite a bit as well. They only have a 4 implied team total here. He is a slight favorite, 5.5 K prop over in Vegas. And last season in 32 innings, he had a 32% K rate, which I really do like. Not sure we're going to see that as high this season, especially in a larger sample size. And only had 3 strikeouts in his first matchup of the year versus the Miami Marlins, still around 15 fantasy points, which I would take all day at 6,700, especially with the pitching on this slate. If he can get us 15 fantasy points, you can sign me up for that. But he was decent last year to give up some power, but this Milwaukee Brewers lineup versus righties will strike out quite a bit, so I do think there's some strikeout upside. Wouldn't be surprised if he can get us 5+ here. Looking at the daily team sheet for how the current Brewers roster does perform versus right-handed pitching, it's actually pretty bad, so I am liking this matchup a bit for Ponce de Leon. So going specifically to right-handed pitching, they're 29th in batting average, 27th in WOBA, 28th in ISO, 28th in WRC+, dead last in slugging, 20th in on-base percentage, third to last in OPS, and the highest strikeout rate. Like, everybody in this lineup strikes out a lot versus righties. Jackie Bradley at 23, Christian Yelich at 31%, Garcia at 23, which is actually pretty good compared to almost everybody else in this lineup, because we got Travis Shaw at 31, Narvaez at nearly 30, Castanera is almost at 35, Peterson's over 30, and Urias is at 26. So I know he's not a big strikeout pitcher. He did show some upside of that last year, so if we can see that flash in this game, there is some strikeout potential here. And I don't think the Brewers are going to beat him up too bad. So even if he does give up a couple runs, we can get like a handful of strikeouts, maybe a little bit more, maybe potentially pick up a win here. I'm not super confident he could pick up the win, but it's certainly possible. But Ponce de Leon, he's mainly a price play for SP2, and with the pitching we have on this slate, I mean, these guys I feel like are going to pick up quite a bit of ownership. I do think Stroman will be the chalky SP1, and then I feel like ownership could kind of be split up on Matt Shoemaker and Ponce de Leon for the most part, but that's kind of it for the pitching. I don't really like anybody else too much. Maybe a couple of guys I think you could put on a short list, but not too much real interest in them. So I think with that being said, we can move on to the bats. As per usual, we will start with the catchers and move around the diamond. And, you know, it usually is the worst position, but catcher sucks today. I don't have, like, any catcher I like above anybody else a ton. So I really just put the catchers I like in the lineups I like the most. I like the Twins today. I like the Angels. I like the Toronto Blue Jays. You could also put the Padres catcher in there, but it's just whoever fits. That's my recommendation. I would just fill in catcher last. Like, whoever fits, don't really care because I don't have a strong lean on any of these catchers. But if you can get a catcher on a good team with a good total, that's usually a decent way to go, because at least there's some RBI opportunity there if guys are on base. But anyway, up top, we're going to start with Danny Jansen, $3,400. Again, don't really love him individually, but I just want to expose you to that Blue Jays Los Angeles game because they were playing, it looks like, in a high school park. There's high-scoring games there pretty much every single night. Now, a couple times now, we've had a flip-flop here where the Blue Jays don't score runs, but the Angels go off. Then last night, the Blue Jays went off. They scored a couple of touchdowns, it looks like, if you're looking at the box score. I think the Angels only had 1 run, but I mean, it's a small park. It's going to favor hitting, and 2 not great pitchers on the mound. We have Alex Cobb, who was decent in his first start, but he's still not that great of a pitcher, and I'm definitely going to give the advantage here to the Toronto Blue Jays, so no concerns there, even though he did throw 7 strikeouts in his first outing. But Blue Jays, Angels, it should be another high-scoring affair here. Tanner Roark and Alex Cobb on the mound, so I'm going to give the advantage to the bats. Both these lineups are pretty darn good. The Angels have a really good lineup, and so do the Toronto Blue Jays, even though they're going to be without Teoscar Hernandez and George Springer, as per usual, as he hasn't played yet this season. But still, really good lineups here. So Danny Jansen, we just want a piece of that Blue Jays roster. I don't hate going that route. And same goes for Max Stassi. Don't love him individually. I prefer him versus lefties. But Tanner Roark, not that great of a pitcher. If you want to look at his splits last season, nothing impressive here whatsoever. He had a 6.8 ERA in 47 innings, 5.84 xFIP, a strikeout rate below 20%, a double-digit walk rate, gave a 309 batting average, a 304 ISO, and only had a 35% ground ball rate. So you can sign me up for all the Angels here. Definitely one of the best offenses in the entire slate, if not the best. There's no implied team total out yet for either of these teams, but I'd have to imagine they're probably going to be in the mid fives is my guess. I think we're going to see an 11 over under, maybe 11.5, but I want pieces of both teams quite a bit. Easily one of the best spots for offense on the entire slate. Then Ryan Jeffers, $2,800. He is just cheap Twins exposure for the most part. I do think they're a pretty solid stack today. They have a team total close to 5, which is one of the higher ones on the entire slate. It's not super exciting because there's a lot of teams above 5 today, like the Padres. I'm going to assume Toronto and LA are both going to be above 5. San Diego, which I guess I already mentioned, Boston's above 5, and Cleveland's above 5. So the Twins aren't like one of my favorite stacks out there, but I do think they're certainly viable. I know Flexen had a decent start to the season. I think he had around 23, 25 DraftKings points in his first start, but he's not that great of a pitcher in my opinion, so the Twins can certainly get to him. Byron Buxton, Max Kepler, Eddie Rosario. Nope, Eddie Rosario's on Cleveland now. Forget about that. I know he's on the sheet later on, but I do like Rosario today. But no longer on the Twins. Nelson Cruz, obviously. Obviously, Mitch Garver wouldn't be in the lineup if we had Ryan Jeffers here, but I still think we can stack up the Twins. They're more of a contrarian stack, but it was mainly just a price play here for Ryan Jeffers. Not super excited about him, but if you do have some Twins in your lineup, or if you have $2,800 left and he's the only guy that fits, I say go for it. But I don't really love any of these catchers today. Then dropping down to first base, we have Eric Hosmer, who had a donger yesterday. And I did have a nice Padres stack in my single entry, and they were decently low owned besides Grisham, but I got Cronenworth at around 8 or 10%. Hosmer was like 4 or 5%. Trent Grisham was around close to 30, but he had a great game. But I thought he was going to be a little bit higher owned than that, so I was kind of glad he wasn't super chalky. But yeah, definitely a big fan of the Padres here. They smashed last night, and I would not be surprised if they do that once again here versus Fulte, who I wouldn't say sucks, but he's definitely a beatable pitcher. In this lineup, I'll definitely give the advantage to over most pitchers, so Fulte's not going to scare me. Plus, the bullpen for the Rangers isn't that good either, so I think we can have a nice repeat performance from the San Diego Padres. But Eric Hosmer, I know he's pretty expensive, so I'm only usually getting there in stacks because of that price point. And Shohei Ohtani, I imagine, is going to pick up a ton of ownership at first base. He's also eligible in the outfield, so maybe Rowdy Tellez picks up a lot of that ownership at first base. But Hosmer had elite numbers versus right-handed pitching last season, a batting average of .330, WOBA above 400, a nice ISO, WRC plus at 160, slugging close to 600, and OPS close to 1,000. So love Hosmer, don't love the price tag, so probably only getting there in stacks, but he's batting cleanup for one of the best stacks in the entire slate with a 5.36 implied team total, which is currently the highest. But it's probably going to not be the highest once Toronto and LA comes out, but it's definitely going to be one of the highest on the entire slate. Shohei Ohtani, $4,800. He's been raking the past few games here, and I don't think that's going to change here versus Tanner Roark. This is definitely a beatable matchup here, and you get the lefty on righty matchup for Ohtani. He's also eligible in the outfield as well, so I assume he'll be one of the highest owned players in the entire slate. And to be honest, he's one of my favorite plays as well. I don't want to call anyone a core play at 8 a.m. in the morning, but Ohtani's looking like he's going to be one of the most surefire plays for me, in my opinion. He's got plenty of power versus righties. And Tanner Roark, like I mentioned earlier, is a guy that will give up a lot of power, doesn't really strike out guys too much, and he walks guys quite a bit and has those high fly balls as well. So last season versus lefties, only a 23-inning sample size, but he had a 5.18 xFIP. The strikeout rate was actually decently high, but near a 15% walk rate, a 45% fly ball rate, 40% hard contact rate, and around a 200 ISO given up to lefties. So Roark, not a pitcher I'm too scared of here, and the Angels are pretty much the best stack on the slate in my opinion, because I feel like overall it's going to be easier to stack them up than the Blue Jays, but you're kind of picking hairs there. But I do prefer the Angels over the Blue Jays ever so slightly on today's slate. And Rowdy Tellez, $2,600. This is just getting dirt cheap Blue Jays exposure here versus Alex Cobb, the lefty on righty matchup. Tellez is a guy that isn't the greatest hitter in the world, but he can pack some power here versus right-handed pitching. Last season, a 302 ISO versus righties, a 13% K rate, an OPS close to 1,000, and close to a double-digit walk rate as well. So I definitely like Rowdy Tellez for that price point. If you want a cheap bat to spend up on other bats on this slate, Rowdy Tellez is your guy, and I could see him picking up quite a bit of ownership as well. So I actually think instead of going Ohtani at first base, I think most people will probably end up going Tellez, and then they'll probably get Ohtani in the outfield. So that's just kind of my thoughts on the roster construction so far. But then dropping down to second base, we have Marcus Simeon, $4,700. Again, I know Cobb wasn't terrible in his first start, but he's still not a pitcher that I think is all that great. If you want to look at his splits last season, in a 52-inning sample size, he had a strikeout rate below 20%, a 4.21 xFIP, but almost a double-digit walk rate. Didn't give up much power. He was actually pretty good in those categories. Got a good amount of ground balls as well, but he's been beatable in the past, and I'm not really too concerned about him. I'm definitely giving the advantage to the Blue Jays lineup here. Then dropping down to Kike Hernandez, $4,100. The Boston Red Sox are a decent stack today. I wouldn't say I love them, and a couple of those guys are pretty expensive, like Xander Bogaerts, JD Martinez, and Rafael Devers, so it's not the easiest to stack them up, so I wouldn't say I want to play them over guys like the Angels or the Blue Jays or maybe even the Padres. But Kike is a fine option. I prefer him versus lefties. He doesn't have the greatest lineup. He doesn't have the greatest numbers in the world versus right-handed pitching, but Jorge Lopez is not a great pitcher, and if he's going to be leading off, I'm going to want exposure to him in Red Sox stacks. But last year, Jorge Lopez, 6.6 ERA with the 4.89 xFIP, strikeout rate below 20%. He didn't give up much power, but you can certainly stack against him. I'm not really too concerned. The Baltimore bullpen's not that great either, so Kike is a fine option for Boston stacks, but if you want to one-off him, I wouldn't say I'm a super big fan of doing a one-off with Kike, but he's multi-position eligible, so if you like 4,100 left, I don't think he's the worst play out there. Then Jorge Polanco with $3,600 going up against Chris Flex, and I kind of mentioned this earlier with Jeffers, but I don't love the Twins, but I do think they're a decent contrarian stack today because I can't imagine too many people are going to be on them. People are going to be hunting those teams with 5+ implied team totals, and right now the Twins, they're slightly below that, and there's a lot of teams that are going to have team totals over 5 today, so I can't imagine the Twins are going to be super popular, but it's a beatable matchup here versus Chris Flexen, and Jorge Polanco does hit righties pretty well. I know he's not going to be leading off here versus lefty, at least projected not to, so he's going to be a spot down in the order, but even hitting second is perfectly fine with me. So Polanco, I think, is a fine option for the price point. Then going down to third base, we have Manny Machado, $5,300 going up against Folty. I like all the Padres here. I prefer Machado versus left-handed pitching. He absolutely crushes that, but if you are stacking up the Padres, Manny Machado is a hard guy to lead off for your lineup. I actually did it last night because he just didn't fit. I unfortunately was running out of salary, so I left Manny Machado off. Fortunately for me, he didn't really kill it. I think he only had around 9 fantasy points, but he's got, with the T's out, he's got the most upside in that lineup, hitting in the middle of the order. Plenty of RBI opportunity for him. He's got plenty of power, can always hit a home run. I know he's a bit expensive, but if you're stacking up the Padres, definitely a top option for me. But the guy I'm probably going to get to in third base today, Anthony Rendon. He's about $500 cheaper than Manny Machado. Going to be hitting cleanup for a lineup that I think is going to have the highest implied team total on the slate. Tanner Roark's a guy that gave up over a 300 ISO last season, and Rendon's just an all-around really, really good hitter. I mean, he doesn't really struggle in any category. He had above a 200 ISO last season, a 154 WRC+, a 418 on base percentage, only a 13% K rate, close to a 20% walk rate, high fly ball rate, high hard contact rate. I really have nothing bad to say about Anthony Rendon whatsoever. I guess I prefer him versus lefties, but he's still elite versus righties. So $4,800, feel like he's a bit underpriced here. Could easily be above 5K, so I'm looking to take advantage of that today. And more than likely would make my cash lineup at third base, assuming I can make the salary fit. I haven't tried to build lineups yet, but I don't think it's going to be too hard playing Rendon at $4,800, assuming we use a guy like Ponce de Leon or Matt Shoemaker at SP2 today. So love Rendon quite a bit. And then on the opposite side of this game, we have Kevin Biggio, $4,200. He's pretty cheap. So if you wanted to get the him in cash games just to save even more money from Rendon, I don't hate that, but I do think Rendon's got a little bit more upside than Biggio. But I assume their team total is going to be above 5 here, and he had some fine splits versus right-handed pitching last season. He actually had some better numbers versus lefties, so he's a bit reverse splitsy for that. But he's still at okay numbers versus right-handed pitching. We'll strike out a little bit, which is an issue, but $4,200 for one of the best teams in the slate. Don't hate that at all. And then on the same team, just different positions and hitting one spot further back, we have Bo Bichette, $4,800. And if you're stacking the Blue Jays, I don't know why you want to leave Bo Bichette off. He's got some of the most upside in that lineup, so obviously I like him. We could look at the numbers, but they're pretty good versus both lefties and righties. We'll just look at them overall. Had a 3.1 batting average last year, 353 WOBA, 122 WRC+, 512 slugging. 20% carry, didn't really walk much at all, but he's got plenty of upside here. A good amount of pop as well with over a 200 ISO. So Bo Bichette, you can sign me up in Blue Jay stacks or even a one-off. If you have enough money to spend up for him in cash games, or if you're just looking for a shortstop to play and you got the money for him, I love Bo Bichette. He's my number one shortstop on the slate. And then Niko Goodrum at $2,800, and I realize this is now out of order, so it's going to bother me. I should have Kim here because he's $3,000 instead of $2,800, but anyway, we'll roll with it. Just apologize for being out of order, but Niko Goodrum, he's not a great hitter, had some pretty pedestrian numbers last season and 179 plate appearances, but the one thing I will say for him is he's a switch hitter, and he actually hits left-handed pitching pretty well, and he's got Logan Allen on the mound, which is like, I think the Indians, he's got to be like the first Indians pitcher that's been a lefty in a long time, if someone wants to let me know in the comments, but ever since I can remember, Indians have had right-handed pitchers, so it's kind of weird seeing a lefty on the mound last time when he was out, but he did fine. But looking at lefties, his splits versus lefties last year, a 333 batting average, a 435 WOBA, a 364 ISO, close to a 700 slugging, OPS above 1,000, did strike out quite a bit, but had a nice fly ball rate, and a WRC plus close to 200. So Niko Goodrum, I know I don't love using the Tigers much, but he should be batting cleanup. But he should be batting leadoff here versus a lefty, and at $2,800, if you need the salary relief, I think he is certainly a fine option. Then Kim here at $3,000. I think he went deep last night, but he's just a cheap portion of. But he's just getting cheap exposure to that Padres lineup, which I think is one of the best stacks on the entire slate with their 5.36 implied team total currently. Wouldn't be too surprised if that rises by the time first pitch happens. But at $3,000, you can play him at second base as well. If you just want cheap Padres exposure, he is your guy, because for the most part, those guys are a bit pricey. Then going down to the outfield, Mike Trout, $6,200. He is insanely expensive. Wasn't he like $5,200 a few games ago? That's unfortunately not the case anymore. You're paying an absolute premium for him, but if you got the money for him, he's the best play on the slate. He crushes right-handed pitching, and Tanner Roark is just not that great versus either lefties or righties. But looking at Trout's numbers versus righties, we know they're insanely good. 180 WRC plus, OPS above 1,000, 15% walk rate, 52% fly ball rate, 433 WOBA, ISO close to 300. Looking at Roark splits versus right-handed pitching last season, he had a 6.56 xFIP, a 13% K rate, 393 ISO given up, and a lot of fly balls, a lot of hard contact, and near 800 slugging. So if there's anyone to pick a home run today, if there's anyone to pick who you think's going to hit a home run today, Mike Trout is just absolutely jumping off the board here. He crushes righties. Roark sucks versus righties. It's just a perfect storm brewing here for Mike Trout. Plus the Angels are my top stack of the day. And then taking a bit of a dip down here to the low 5K range, we have Max Kepler at $5,100. And I guess I didn't really realize how expensive he was when I put him on the list. I was probably thinking he was $4,100. So this is pretty expensive for Max Kepler, but he's great versus right-handed pitching. Wish he was a lot cheaper. I guess I really missed that price point. That's really expensive for Kepler, but he has elite numbers versus right-handed pitching. A 266 batting average last year, 383 WOBA, 274 ISO, 144 WRC plus, 540 slugging, a lot of fly balls, only a 16% K rate, and OPS close to 1,000. So whether he's batting leadoff or cleanup, I like Max Kepler quite a bit. Just wish he was a little bit cheaper. I think I was thinking he was cheaper when I put him on the list as well. But and then Jared Walsh, $4,600. He's been hitting fine so far to start the season. He is just getting Angels exposure at a decent price tag. So if you're stacking the 1 through 5 for the Angels, he makes the cut there. And his numbers versus righties last year, a 277 batting average, a 430 WOBA, 178 WRC plus, 738 slugging, and an OPS over 1,000 with only a 12% K rate. So Jared Walsh, do like him quite a bit, hitting in the middle of that order for the Angels. Eddie Rosario, $4,300, going against Jose Urena, who didn't really show much strikeout upside last year. Looking at his overall splits, only had a 14% K rate last season and an xFIP close to 6. And he didn't really give up much power, though. 180 ISO, 247 batting average. So those peripheral numbers were pretty good, but he's still not a pitcher that I'm going to shy away from, and especially versus lefties. It was only a 6-inning sample size, but a 10 xFIP, a 2.9% K rate, and a 375 ISO, a 4.6 batting average, and a 781 slugging. So you can sign me up for the lefties over on the Indians. I know that's a really small sample size, but in the past, he's been a guy that's been tough on righties and has struggled versus lefties. So you can look at all the lefties there. Cesar Hernandez, Ben Gamel. I'm sure there's a couple on the top of my head that I'm forgetting. Jose Ramirez. So if you want to stack the Indians, don't think it's the worst thing in the world. They just don't grade out that well individually for me, but you can certainly target some lefties. And then if you are doing a full stack, I know Franmil Reyes is a righty, but he packs a ton of power, and we've seen that so far to start the season. And Rosario actually grades out pretty well versus him, because Rosario is a big fly ball guy versus right-handed pitching, doesn't really strike out too much, and has some really decent numbers overall. Yeah, 14% K rate, a 50% fly ball rate to right-handed pitching, and an ISO close to 300. So Rosario would be my favorite play over on the Indians. Then dropping down to Trent Grisham, $4,100. He's going to be one of my favorite plays in the slate. Probably would end up being close to a core play for me for sure. I had him as a core play last night. Had around 21 fantasy points. Went deep. I think he went deep versus a lefty. I forget who was in when he was pitching. Was it Wes Benjamin? I want to say he homered off a lefty, but either way, should be hitting leadoff here for one of the best stacks in the entire slate. And Trent Grisham had some really good splits versus right-handed pitching last season, so he is definitely one of my favorite plays at that low price point, leading off for such a good team. Michael Conforto, $3,600. It looks like Miami's going to be bringing out Paul Campbell, which we don't have a ton of information on. Don't have any numbers from him last year. But Michael Conforto crushes right-handed pitching, so he is certainly in play for me. He had a 414 WOBA last year versus righties, 166 WRC plus, 344 batting average, 429 on base percentage, and OPS close to 1,000. He will strike out quite a bit, but I do like Conforto at that price point. You could also put in some other lefties as well, like maybe Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Lindor, even though he's been terrible so far to start the season. Dominic Smith as well. Then Jurickson Profar, $3,200. He's been batting pretty high up in the order for the Padres, and if that continues, it's hard to pass him up at $3,200, being such a for hitting so far up in a really good lineup and one of my favorite stacks in the entire slate. So Profar, while he's not the greatest hitter in the world, he does usually hit for a decently high batting average, and $3,200 is pretty hard to pass up. Also eligible at first base as well, so he's a bit flexible. Then if you want a cheap outfielder, there's some other guys I like Ben Gamel, and I think you could even use Josh Naylor there. But DJ Stewart, $2,400. He was a guy last year for a decent stretch of time where I was playing him every single day because he was going off at pretty much min price, and he's going to be hitting in the middle of the order here for the Baltimore Orioles. He's only $2,400. Nick Pavetta's a guy which he wasn't terrible in his first start, but he can give up plenty of power. He does have some strikeout upside, but he's a guy that will give up power to both sides of the plate and struggle with walks. And DJ Stewart versus right-handed pitching last season, not the worst numbers in the world for a guy that's priced $2,400. A really low batting average, but a 376 WOBA, an ISO close to 300, a 140 WRC plus, and close to a 20% walk rate with a 42% fly ball rate and a 40% hard contact rate. So if you need a really cheap outfielder, DJ Stewart's looking like a pretty decent option there. Also a nice hitter's park over in Baltimore. But I think that's going to be it for the video, guys. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Check out the Patreon if you want. Link is down below for the projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, all that fun stuff, all the data that you ever want for baseball. It is on my spreadsheet. And if you want to follow me over on social media, handles in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Hope it was helpful. I hope you guys have a fantastic end to the weekend. Hopefully, wherever you are, the weather is wonderful. We should have a NASCAR race today at 4 p.m. I'm deciding if I want to go live beforehand. Lineup's already locked, but I could talk about some of the lineups I have and ownership and things like that if you are interested. So anyway, I'll stop rambling. See you in the next video, and hope you have a wonderful end to the weekend.